Tournaments are a great way to increase visibility and to help liven up your local community, but they can be intimidating to run and to organize. So far, I've run a couple of moderately successful Legions Imperialis tournaments, and here are my top 5 tips of how you might do the same thing. The first thing that I want to suggest is just to keep it small. Especially if this is your first tournament, keeping it small is going to make your life much easier. Now, what do I mean by that? First of all, keep the points limit very low. I would say start at 1,000 points, use the opening maneuvers mission from Warhammer Community on a 3x3 board, and not only is this going to make it easier to organize, people are just going to be more likely to play. We have to keep in mind that Legions Imperialis is a pretty new game with a small player base, and it does take a lot of effort to get even a small army onto the table. So if you keep your games small, it's going to increase your player base, and it's going to make everything go a lot smoother. I'm also going to suggest that you only do 2 rounds for your tournament. I know a lot of people like to do 3 rounds in a single day, but trust me, 3 rounds of Legions Imperialis in one day is a lot to handle. And again, because the player base is small, we want to make sure that people are going to have a good time, have a fun time, and still have time in their day after the tournament in order to do whatever else they need to do on the weekends. Because 3 games is going to take up all day. And you really just need to make accounting for that when you plan your game. Nothing wrong with having a 3-round tournament, nothing wrong with having a 5-round tournament, but just be realistic about your commitment level and the commitment level of your players. Now, if you are going to only do 2 rounds, you're probably not going to be able to have a clear winner if you're doing a Swiss-style tournament. So what that means is you are probably going to have to determine the first place winner by the number of victory points rather than having a clear winner. So what that means is you need to have the same mission for every round, and you need to have the same secondaries for every round so that everybody has the chance to get the same number of victory points. And the winner will be the player who has achieved the most victory points over the 2 rounds. The next thing to keep in mind when organizing your tournament is the importance of terrain, because terrain is going to make or break your games. You should have a sufficient variety. Make use of all of the different kinds of terrain that the Legions Imperialis rulebook contains, particularly difficult terrain, dangerous terrain, obstructing terrain, and structures. You don't want to have all of one or all of another. You should have a variety. That way, different units and different capabilities will really come to the fore and have more of an effect in your tournament games. You should also make sure that you have a sufficient quantity of terrain. In general, the rules suggest, as an average, between 8 and 16 pieces of terrain per table on a 5x4 foot game map. And so that comes out to about 0.4 to 0.8 pieces of terrain per square foot. So use that as a rough guide of how much terrain you should have, especially if you're playing on a 3x3 table like the opening maneuvers mission suggests. Just use that as a rough guide of how many pieces of terrain you should have on the table. And also consider adding scatter terrain. So we've been talking about the major terrain pieces, which are about 6 inches by 6 inches in size, but you should also have some scatter terrain to give some variety and to break up the open areas. Things like minefields or barbed wire, barricades, just things to make players think a little bit more rather than just being able to put their units anywhere they like. I have made a video on terrain in Legions Imperialis, so if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on terrain specifically, make sure you check that video out. Now, this is really important. When you organize a tournament, you are taking on a leadership role. And that means that you need to plan effectively and make sure that you are doing what needs to be done in order to make the event successful. And planning is a huge part of that. And you don't want your event to waste people's time because people won't come back. So what can you do to plan effectively? And I've sort of laid out my process here. And this is just very basic, but the first thing that you want to do is just gauge interest in your local community. Check with the regular players of Legions Imperialis, if there are any, and see if they're interested in a tournament at all. And that will tell you a lot right away. If there's enough interest, if there's, 6 or 7 or 8 people who say, oh yeah, sure, I'd be interested in playing in a tournament, then you can move forward. If you don't, it's probably not going to be a successful tournament because people aren't going to show up, obviously. So once you've gauged your interest level in your local community, just check your dates. Most people probably are going to want to play on the weekend, but check with your players and check with the location that you want to hold your event at. Make sure that the tables are free. There's enough tables, that the tables are big enough, because some stores don't necessarily have a 5x4 table for you to play on. And once you've done that, then make sure that those two mesh, right? So make sure that the date works for both players and the location, and then confirm that with both the players and the store. So you've kind of done an initial temperature check with both. Once that lines up, then confirm that with the players and with the store. Make sure that you publish a tournament pack. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but it should have all of the important details in writing so that everybody knows what the win conditions are, when it's going to be, what the army construction looks like, how many points they need to bring. That way everything's in writing. So if somebody has an issue or doesn't know, you can show them, here in this document is everything you need to know. It was published before the tournament, and there's no reason for there to be confusion. If things are not in writing, that's when things become fuzzy. Once you've done all that and your tournament date is approaching, make sure that you remind everybody. Talk to the people who've said that, yeah, I'm going to show up and I'm going to play in your tournament. Just remind them, because everybody forgets. And if you don't remind people, it's just far more likely that that's going to happen. Remind the store, too, because you may have talked with a particular employee. Maybe they didn't check with the manager, or maybe there's a new employee and they're not tracking that you're holding a tournament on this day. And if you remind them, that's just going to avoid any issues. And then, of course, you have to hold your event. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about too, when you publish your tournament pack, don't try to fix the game with your tournament pack. This is a really easy way, I think, to cause bad blood. Because when you try to fix the game, all of a sudden, everybody is not playing on the same page. When you try to fix the game, people might come to your tournament and they're expecting to play the rules as written, and you've done something to try to fix the game. And now either their army is not valid or it can't do what they thought it could. And it's not a good idea. It's better just to accept the game as it is and move forward. Now, I'm not saying that you can't fix the game ever. I mean, obviously you can do whatever you want. But especially if this is your first, your second, your third tournament, just accept the game as it is. Have people come in, have people play, and enjoy the game and build your community. And once you've got a community established, once you've run several tournaments, then maybe you can start thinking about how to fix the game, if it needs to be fixed, and how to do that. Okay, I think we all remember at the beginning of Legions Imperialis, there was a lot of things that people thought were broken or didn't work or weren't good, and a lot of people were trying to fix the game. And as the game has gone on, now there are still those things, but as the game has gone on, a lot of those things that were initially, thought to be wrong with the game have turned out not to be so bad. So don't fall into the trap of trying to fix the game just because maybe you think something is wrong or is not fun or doesn't work right. Especially if you're new to the game or if you haven't played that many games. If you've played 50 games of Legions Imperialis, you've run 10 tournaments, that's when I think you start to have some authority to say, okay, these things maybe are not, they're not balanced or they're not working and they're not good for tournaments, they're not healthy. Then maybe start to adjust those things with your community's approval. But again, if this is your first tournament, your first 10 games of Legions Imperialis, just accept the game as it is and play it as written. All right, I'm coming down from the soapbox and back to the next tip. So this is pretty important also, and I think you should try to have more people than you think you need. So obviously, you probably need at least 4 people in order to run a tournament. And you should then try to have at least 6 people who are confident and confirmed that they will be there at your tournament, because you should count on at least 2 of those people dropping out of your tournament. I know that probably sounds a little bit cynical, but it's just a fact of life. And we have to keep in mind that we are playing with tiny plastic soldiers. And, I take it seriously, and I think a lot of people take it seriously, but life does happen and life does intervene, and people may not be able to show up even if they fully intended to do so. And you just need to account for that in your planning. You should also be prepared to play. You should bring an army matching the requirements of the tournament and be ready to play with somebody if somebody's late or they just don't show, and that way you can round out the numbers if needed. And this may be a controversial statement, but I'm going to say that the worst result that you can have in your tournament, obviously other than it being a complete disaster, is to try to set up a tournament and have not enough people show up. And I think it would be better not to try to run something than to try to set something up and have it fail. And I know this sort of goes against the normal go-getter attitude, but if you try to set up a tournament and people just don't show up or it doesn't work out, it's going to be a demoralizing thing, because people are then going to associate the fact that your tournament did not work or not enough people showed up to the tournament with the next time that you run that, or you try to run that tournament. So if you don't think you have enough people, if you're not confident that enough people are going to show up, I would say just reschedule and try to find a different time, a different place for your tournament, rather than to try to have it happen and for it not to work. That said, be very careful about tailoring your tournament schedule to other people's availability. Now, obviously, you need to have space available, so working with the store is completely necessary. But trying to tailor your schedule to the tournament participants is going to be I think, frustrating exercise, because it's just going to be extremely difficult to find a day where everybody's schedule lines up correctly. And for you to try to chase the ball like that is going to make your life much more difficult. If you're able to find a rough time frame where most people say they would be able to go to your tournament, and then just pick a day within that time frame, I think that is the best course of action, because that will make your life much easier, because you're not constantly trying to reschedule to account for people's change in circumstances. You set a day, people can either show up or they can't. And that's, again, why you need to check in with your players, like we talked about in the planning section, to make sure that people are still able to be at the tournament on the day that you have chosen. This is the last tip that I have for you, and to my mind, the most important. And that is to not involve money in your tournament at all. As soon as you involve money, your tournament stops being a community event and becomes a product that you are selling. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you should be aware of the implications that come with charging for your event. Because at the end of the day, when you charge for your event, the people that attend your tournament are no longer your friends and acquaintances. They are your customers. They are giving you money for a product, and they have every right to expect a return for the money that they have given you. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to be prepared for that dynamic, and you need to make sure that your event is going to be worth the price that you want to charge. I would go even further and say that at least for the first couple of tournaments that you organize, as long as they are small, just cover any table fee the store requires yourself. It's going to be a little bit of an expense, but I think it will be worth it in the sense that, again, you're removing this idea of money from the equation. There's no longer any concern about people paying money to come to an event that you've organized and for it not to be what they wanted or what they expected. And that carries through to prizes as well. Because whenever you involve money as a prize, you are establishing certain expectations of your players, and you are incentivizing them to act in certain ways. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to be prepared for the dynamic that that is going to bring to your tournament. My suggestion is just to completely remove money from the equation. Find ways to recognize the winners without money. For my events, I always make a laurel crown for the winner, and that is the only kind of award that I give out. Now, if you do want to offer prize money or any kind of award, my suggestion would be to make it some kind of award for participation. A raffle might be a good option. Just give everybody a ticket when they show up for the tournament, and if they stay till the end, they have a chance of winning a prize, whether it's just cash or store credit, or even a box of miniatures. And that way, we're incentivizing participation and a community spirit rather than just being the best. Because at the end of the day, Legions Imperialis is primarily a narrative game. And these tournaments, for me, should be less about winning at all costs and more about a way to get your community together, to get visibility for the game, and to have a good time playing Legions Imperialis. So I know that got a little soapboxy at times, but I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was at least thought-provoking. If you've run your own Legions Imperialis tournament, let me know how you did it. And feel free to share your own tips and suggestions about how best to run a Legions Imperialis tournament. I'll look forward to reading them.